The morning Gordon Hale called his 3 sons into his office. None of them thought it would be the last time they'd sit in those leather chairs as the men they believed themselves to be. Gordon had built Hale Contracting from a single flatbed truck and a borrowed drill press. 41 years. That was how long it had taken him to go from patching driveways in Thunder Bay to running one of the most respected mid-size construction firms in Ontario. He had calluses on his hands that never fully went away, even now, even after years of board meetings and client dinners and shaking hands with city councilors who wouldn't have given him the time of day back when he wore steel toes to work every morning. He was 63 years old, and he was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. His eldest, Garrett, was 38. He had his father's jawline and none of his patience. He ran the commercial division and ran it well, on paper, though Gordon had noticed how Garrett's version of running it well involved a lot of delegating and very little showing up before 9. His middle son, Weston, was 34. Weston was sharp, quick with numbers, and had a gift for talking clients into things they hadn't known they wanted. He also had a gift for talking himself out of accountability whenever something went sideways. And then there was Reed, the youngest at 31, who had left the company 3 years ago to work as a site supervisor for a non-profit housing organization in Sudbury, earning a fraction of what his brothers made. And who sat in that chair now with the quiet, slightly guarded look of someone who wasn't sure why he'd been summoned. Gordon set 3 envelopes on the desk. Each one had a name on it. "I want you to take 2 weeks," he said. "Starting Monday, I'm pulling your access cards, your company cards, your trucks. You each get what's in that envelope and nothing else." Garrett laughed. It came out short and uncertain, like he wasn't sure if it was a joke yet. "Dad, open them." They did. Inside each envelope was $300 in cash, a handwritten address, and a single index card that read, "Find your own way. Come back in 2 weeks. We'll talk about the company then." Weston fanned the bills with his thumb. $300. For 2 weeks, Gordon said. "You're not serious. The address is a rooming house in Copper Cliff. Clean, safe, weekly rates included. The rest is yours to manage." He folded his hands on the desk. "I've been thinking about who's going to take over this company when I step back. I've been thinking about it for 2 years, and I realized I don't actually know who you are anymore. Maybe I never did. Maybe that's my fault." He paused. "This is how I'm going to find out." Reid was the only one who didn't argue. He looked at the index card, turned it over, blank on the back, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Garrett's reaction was immediate and loud. He had a mortgage on a house in Barrie, 2 car payments, a wife who had strong opinions about their standard of living, and a golf membership he'd just renewed. He laid all of this out for his father in the tone of a man who expected reason to prevail. Gordon listened. When Garrett was finished, Gordon said, "The address is in the envelope." Weston was subtler. He spent 20 minutes trying to negotiate. Could they keep their phones? Could the cash be bumped to 500? What exactly were the criteria for this? Because if there were metrics, he'd like to know them so he could plan accordingly. Gordon recognized this tactic. He'd seen Weston use it in contract negotiations for years. It worked on clients. It didn't work on him. "Monday morning," Gordon said. "That's all." Garrett drove to Copper Cliff on Sunday night. Already furious, he'd called his wife, Dina, from the parking lot of a Tim Hortons outside Sudbury, and the call had not gone well. She'd asked if his father had lost his mind. Garrett had said he didn't know. She'd asked if they could get a lawyer involved, and Garrett had said he didn't think that was the right move. Not yet, not publicly, though privately he was already turning it over. He was the eldest. He'd given 12 years to this company. He'd brought in the Lakehead Regional Contract, the Sault Ste. Marie Waterfront Development, the arena retrofit in North Bay. 12 years of his life, and his father wanted to test him with $300 and a room above a laundromat. The rooming house was on a side street off Regent, a narrow 2-story building with aluminum siding and a hand-lettered sign above the buzzer. His room was small and smelled faintly of old carpet and radiator heat. There was a single bed, a dresser with a cracked mirror, and a window that looked out onto a chain-link fence. Garrett sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at if he still had his personal phone. His father had only pulled the company devices, and Garrett, in the 48 hours since the meeting, had already made 3 calls. One to his buddy Fleming, who worked in real estate and had offered to float him some cash informally. One to a client contact who owed him a favor and had a spare room in his condo. One to his mother, who was separated from Gordon and had no love left to spend defending him. By Tuesday, Garrett was not living on $300. He wasn't lying about it to anyone exactly. He just wasn't talking about it. He told himself it wasn't cheating, it was resourcefulness. He'd always believed resourcefulness was the point. He was a problem solver. He solved the problem. He spent his days at the condo his contact had lent him, working remote on a side consulting arrangement he'd quietly kept running for 18 months, unknown to the company. The money wasn't much, but it was enough. He ate well. He worked out. He called Dina every evening and told her he was managing fine. He never once thought about what his father had actually been asking. Weston lasted 4 days in the rooming house before he found a workaround he considered elegant. He still had his personal laptop. He still had his connections. And Weston had always understood that money, at its core, was just a language. And he spoke it fluently enough to find people willing to lend him some. He called a former client, a developer named Sprague, who'd once told Weston he was the sharpest young guy he'd dealt with in 20 years of building subdivisions. Weston reminded him of this. He offered to do some consulting work, informal, off the books, in exchange for a weekly stipend. Sprague thought it was a strange arrangement, but he liked Weston, so he agreed. By day 5, Weston had rented a decent room in a proper hotel in Sudbury's South End, was expensing dinners to Sprague's informal account, and was spending his afternoons sitting in hotel lobbies, telling anyone who'd listen about a deal he was quietly putting together. He had a gift for making people feel like they were being let in on something. He told himself he was demonstrating exactly what the company needed, the ability to create value from nothing, to turn relationships into resources. He genuinely believed this. What he had actually demonstrated, to no one but himself, was that his first instinct in a moment of constraint was to find someone else to carry the weight. He called his father once, midway through the second week, to ask if the 2 weeks could be shortened. He had a meeting he really shouldn't miss. Gordon said no and hung up. Weston went back to the hotel bar and ordered a scotch and told the woman beside him that he was in town for a development project. Reed drove himself to Copper Cliff on Sunday afternoon. He'd been here before, not this exact building, but this part of the province, this kind of neighborhood, the particular texture of a street where people are working hard and not quite making it. He'd spent the last 3 years in Sudbury adjacent, supervising builds for a nonprofit that put up transitional housing. He knew what a rooming house looked like. He knew what $300 for 2 weeks felt like for the people he worked alongside. He checked in, put his bag down, and took stock. After the room rate was accounted for in his head, even though his father had said it was covered, Reed wanted to understand the math. He figured he had money for food, basic transit, and maybe 1 or 2 small purchases if he was careful. He made a list. He went to a grocery store and bought rice, canned beans, eggs, a block of cheese, bread, coffee, and apples. He spent $41. He carried the bags back himself. Monday morning, he walked to the nearest Canadian Tire and asked if they needed any casual labor. They didn't. He walked to a hardware store 2 blocks down and asked the same question. The man behind the counter, a broad-shouldered guy in his 50s, named Reed would learn later, Beaumont, looked him over and said he could use someone to help with a delivery run on Wednesday, if Reed was willing to work for cash and didn't mind lifting. Reed said that was fine. Tuesday he spent helping a woman from the rooming house. Her name was Phyllis. She was 67, and she had a shopping cart full of bottles she needed to get across town to the depot. Carry her load. It took 2 hours. She tried to give him $5. He told her to keep it. She insisted. He took it and bought her a coffee on the way back. He wasn't performing. That was the thing about Reed that was difficult to explain from the outside. He wasn't doing this to prove something, not to his father, not to himself. He'd learned a long time ago, on his first job out of school, a union carpentry gig in Timmins where he'd been the youngest guy on crew by 15 years, that the fastest way to understand anything was to shut up and start doing. He'd carried that with him into every job since. Wednesday, he helped Beaumont with the delivery run. Thursday, Beaumont asked if he wanted to come back and help reorganize the back stock. Reed came back. By Friday, Beaumont was paying him under the table for 8 hours of work and had asked if he was looking for something longer term. "Just in town for a couple weeks," Reed said. Beaumont nodded like he'd heard that before and didn't entirely believe it. That evening, Reed went back to the rooming house and ate rice and eggs and sat by the window reading a paperback he'd found in the common room. The radiator knocked. Someone down the hall was watching television too loud. Through the chain-link fence he could see the back of another building, its fire escape rusting at the joints. He thought about his father. Gordon Hale had grown up in a house not much bigger than this room. Reed knew that, had always known it in the abstract way you know things about your parents' past. As information, not experience. But sitting here now, in the specific smallness of this space, with the specific smell of it and the specific sound of the pipes, something shifted. He wasn't just knowing it. He was touching it. He thought about Garrett and Weston. He wondered what they were doing. He had a feeling, the kind that came from 20 years of being the youngest, and therefore the most overlooked and therefore, paradoxically, the most observant, that his brothers had found ways around this. Garrett would have called in a favor inside 48 hours. Weston would have monetized something by day 3. He didn't judge them for it, exactly. He just recognized it. They'd grown up in a world where you called in favors, where you monetized things, where the point was to find the angle. Reed had grown up in the same world and had decided, somewhere around age 25, that he didn't want to live that way. The second week, a man at the rooming house named Teague, late 40s, recovering from a back injury, recently separated, started sitting with Reed in the common room in the evenings. They played cards. They talked. Teague had worked in the mines for 18 years and had strong opinions about pension structures, Tim Hortons versus McDonald's coffee, and whether the Leafs would ever win the cup in his lifetime. Reed had equally strong opinions about at least 2 of those topics. They got along. One night Teague mentioned, almost in passing, that the building's front steps had been crumbling for months, and the landlord kept saying he'd fix it and never did, and that Phyllis had nearly fallen twice. Reed looked at the steps the next morning. Concrete, spalled and heaved. 2 of them structurally compromised. He knew exactly what it would take to fix it. He went back to Beaumont's hardware store and explained the situation. Beaumont sold him the materials at cost and threw in the use of a trowel and a float. Reed spent a Saturday repairing the steps. He did it right. Cleaned the surface, applied bonding agent, mixed the concrete to the right consistency, finished the edges clean. Phyllis stood at the door and watched him work. "You do this for a living?" she asked. "Something like that," Reed said. When the 2 weeks were up, Reed packed his bag, settled up with Beaumont for the last shift, and said goodbye to Teague and Phyllis. Phyllis hugged him. Teague shook his hand and said Reed was welcome back any time, which was, coming from Teague, the highest form of compliment available. Reed drove back to Thunder Bay and walked into his father's office. Gordon was sitting behind his desk when his 3 sons came in. He'd asked them to come at 10 in the morning. Garrett was 7 minutes early, which Gordon recognized as a power move. Weston was exactly on time, which Gordon recognized as a different kind of power move. Reed was 5 minutes late because he'd stopped to get coffees for everyone, including his father, and had forgotten that his father took no sugar. They sat. Gordon looked at them for a long moment without speaking. He was good at that. He'd learned it from a foreman in his first year on the tools, a man named Briggs who could silence a whole crew with a look and a pause. "Tell me about your 2 weeks," he said. "Garrett, start." Garrett did. He spoke for about 4 minutes. He talked about the efficiency of the solution he'd found, the networking value, the demonstration of his ability to leverage existing relationships under pressure. He used the word resourceful 3 times. He made eye contact with his father throughout, in the steady, confident way of a man who has decided the best defense is a good presentation. Gordon listened. His face did not change. Weston went next. His version was similar in architecture to Garrett's, dressed differently. He talked about value creation, about turning constraint into opportunity, about the consulting arrangement he'd structured in real time, which he framed as a proof of concept for a potential new revenue stream the company might consider. He was compelling. Gordon had paid enough lawyers over the years to recognize the difference between someone making a good argument and someone being right. Then Reed. Reed didn't have a presentation. He talked about the grocery store and what he'd bought. He talked about Beaumont and the delivery run and reorganizing the back stock. He talked about Teague and the card games and the Leafs. He talked about Phyllis and the bottles and the $5 bill she'd pressed into his hand and what he'd done with it. He talked about the steps, the bonding agent, the mix ratio, the importance of cleaning the surface first before you patch anything. Otherwise, it doesn't hold. He didn't talk about any of it to make a point. He talked about it the way you talk about something that happened to you. When he finished, the room was quiet. Garrett's jaw was tight. Weston was studying the middle distance in the way he did when he was recalculating. Gordon looked at his youngest son for a long time. "The steps," he said finally. "Did you ask the landlord?" "No," Reed said, "did doing." Gordon nodded slowly. He picked up a pen and set it down again. Then he said, "When I was working a Reno job in a building, not unlike the one you stayed in. The foreman's name was Kowalski. He was a mean man, not cruel, just small in the way some people get small when they've been disappointed enough times. One morning I came in and the site was a disaster from the day before, and nobody was going to clean it up because it wasn't technically anybody's job. So I cleaned it up. Kowalski saw me and he said," Gordon paused. He almost smiled. He said, "You know nobody's paying you for that." And I said, "I know." And he said, "So, why are you doing it?" And I said, "Because it needs doing." The room was very quiet. "I haven't thought about that in 20 years, Gordon said, until Reed said it just now. Garrett made a sound, not quite a word. Gordon looked at him. "I know," Gordon said. "You've given a lot to this company. Both of you have. I'm not saying you haven't. But I've been trying to figure out for 2 years who I can hand this to and not worry. Who I can hand this to and know that when something needs doing and nobody's looking and there's no angle in it, they'll just do it anyway." He paused. "I think I know now." Garrett pushed back his chair. "So that's it?" Reed's never even worked here full-time. He worked here summers for 6 years before he left. He knows the operations. He knows the crews. The crews always liked him. Gordon set his hands flat on the desk. He left because he wanted to, and I respect that. Now I'm asking him to come back if he wants to, in a different capacity. He looked at Reed. "I'm not ready to step back yet," Gordon said. "That's not what this is. I'd want you working alongside me for a year, minimum, before any transition conversation happens. And I want Garrett and Weston involved. Their experience matters. Their client relationships matter. This isn't a winner-takes-all situation." He looked at his elder sons. "But somebody has to be the one who holds the center, and I need that person to be someone who cleans up the site when nobody's watching." Weston was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Did you know it would shake out this way?" "No," Gordon said honestly. "I thought there was a chance any one of you might surprise me." Another silence. "Were you testing us?" Garrett said. His voice had lost most of its edge. What was left sounded less like anger and more like something older and harder to name. "I was trying to see you," Gordon said. "There's a difference." Garrett left the meeting first. He sat in his truck in the parking lot for 20 minutes before he drove away. He told himself he was angry. He was angry. But underneath the anger was something more complicated. A kind of recognition he wasn't ready to look at directly. The way you can't look directly at a bright light. He thought about Fleming and the cash he'd borrowed. He thought about the consulting work he'd been running on the side. He thought about Dina asking him, once, years ago, whether he actually loved the company or just loved what the company meant. He hadn't answered her then. He started the truck. He didn't know, sitting there, whether anything was going to change. Change was harder than it looked from the outside. He'd learned that much. But he thought about his father's face when Reed had said it needed doing, and something about that expression, the recognition in it, the relief, stayed with him on the drive home. Weston called him that evening. They talked for an hour, which was longer than they'd talked in months. Weston said he was thinking about the consulting arrangement. Not whether to hide it, but whether there was an honest version of it that could actually be useful. Garrett said maybe. They talked about their father, about what it must have been like to build something from nothing, about whether they'd ever really understood it. They didn't solve anything, but they talked. Reed stayed in Thunder Bay that night instead of driving back to Sudbury. He sat in his old bedroom at his father's house. Gordon had kept the house, had always kept the house, even when the boys had all moved out and it made no practical sense. The room still had his bookshelves, his old hockey posters, a trophy from a bantam tournament in 2005. Gordon knocked on the doorframe around 9. "You okay?" he said. "Yeah," Reed said. "Just thinking." Gordon sat in the desk chair, the same chair he'd sat in 20 years ago helping Reed with math homework, both of them equally frustrated by fractions. He looked around the room. "I should have told you why I built the company," Gordon said after a while. "Not the business case, the actual reason." He was quiet. "My father worked for someone else his whole life. Good man, hard worker, but every decision someone else made, my father had to live with. I decided when I was 17 that I wasn't going to live that way, that whatever I built was going to be mine to be responsible for." He looked at his hands. "I think I forgot to teach you boys what that actually felt like. I just gave you the thing and not the reason." Reed thought about Phyllis, about the steps, about the specific satisfaction of finishing the edges clean. "I think I figured it out anyway," he said. Gordon looked at him. Something in his face was difficult to read. Pride and guilt mixed together in the proportion that complicated love usually comes in. "I know you did," he said. "That's why we're having this conversation." They sat there for a while, the two of them, in the room where Reed had grown up, while outside the Thunder Bay night came down over the lake and the lights of the harbor reflected on the water, and the house was quiet in the way houses get quiet when the thing that needed to happen has finally happened. Gordon stood up to leave. At the door, he paused. "The steps," he said. "The concrete mix. You got the ratio right?" Reed smiled. 3 parts sand, 2 parts cement, same as you taught me." Gordon put his hand on the doorframe. He didn't say anything for a moment. "Good," he said. Then he turned off the hall light and went to bed.